Oh hi, welcome to Aquatazoo, where we like to nerd out over all things zoo and aquarium related. I'm l.semple, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about emergency preparedness. I am talking about zoos and aquariums and the things that we prepare for because you never know what's going to happen, and it's better to have a big long list of possible scenarios and be ready for them rather than leaving it up to chance and then not having a plan or a way to respond in a quick and easy to manage way. So you might be surprised by some of the things that we, and I say we, meaning zoos and aquariums, tend to prepare for. We typically have a big, long list of stuff, and we run drills, and we try to make plans for the worst case scenario because you just never know what's going to happen. Does it seem insane? Maybe a little bit. It's a lot of work because we have to sit there as, I guess, leadership for a zoo or aquarium, and we just have to sit there and think about what could happen. We have to take precautions and plan because you never know. If you end up with an animal on the loose, that is a worst case scenario. So we had to think about this and be prepared and know what we're going to do and the steps that we're going to take so that our response to emergency situations is orderly. It's not panicked. It is well thought out. We know what to do. Here's the first step. Here's the second step. Here's the third step. And in the end, it's quick and efficient, and there's no risk, or at least limited risk, of danger or someone's life potentially on the line or anything like that. We've kind of thought through the whole process and made a logical list of steps in our response so that all the zoo and aquarium professionals have to do is take the list and execute. I acknowledge that sounds nuts, but we're trying to make sure that everyone's safe at all times, if we can possibly handle it. And we also want this stuff to get done quickly. This stuff is scary for animals. It's scary for staff. It's scary for guests. So when emergencies happen, we have to be ready so that everything's cool and calm and collected. Guests get out and into places where they're safe, and staff know what to do and where to go and how to get more information. All of that goes into this planning for this kind of master list of emergency response. So the stuff that we're trying to prepare for kind of depends on where our facilities are located. So I've lived and worked on the coast, the Atlantic coast, for quite some time, and I know that we have the potential for hurricanes there, right? Especially in the south of the United States, on the Atlantic coast or on the Gulf Coast, you definitely have the potential for hurricanes. So the biggest one that we tend to prepare for in those areas is hurricanes. If you're looking at the Midwest, you're more likely looking at really, really bad thunderstorms, tornadoes, maybe ice or blizzards, that kind of thing. So that's the kind of stuff we have to be prepared for. On the west coast of the U.S., we tend to be ready for more wildfires and earthquakes. And it really just depends on where you're at as to what kind of, at least natural disaster, you're preparing for. There's also flooding. If your facility is located on low ground, you want to prepare for that. Or if you're in an area that's prone to flooding, you want to be prepared. Again, the coastal areas, we're ready for flooding as well. This is all with the understanding that there's only so much that we can do, right? We can't necessarily fight Mother Nature. We don't necessarily want to fight Mother Nature, but we need to make sure that the staff's okay, the guests are okay, and the animals are okay. So we do what we can to respond quickly so that we maintain everyone's safety, make sure that animals are not about to get out, and that they're not in a panic over what's going on with the weather and that sort of thing, and just to make sure that we have a plan for how this is going to work. So for these kind of responses, there's a few things that we're going to do automatically. So first one is to try and make sure that animals are secure. So if they're out and about in their enclosure and they're wandering around doing their thing, we want to make sure that they come inside, right? And there's some instances where we can make this happen quickly, and there's some instances where we can't. So like an earthquake, we're probably not going to be able to call the animals in before it's over, basically, right? Because those are pretty quick and unexpected. There's not any warning, so we don't know. Animals can typically handle that. Like sort of instinctively know what to do, which is wild to watch, but you'll see it happen. Animals do respond because they know that there's an earthquake coming, usually before people do. I know that in a facility where I was working at one point, we did have a small earthquake. It was nothing crazy, but we were getting ready to feed some animals, and I was standing on top of a large shark tank, and I was like, why are these sharks acting so nuts? Like, they were spinning and like barrel rolling through the exhibit. It was really unusual behavior for them, and I got really worried for a second because I was like, what is happening? Are they okay? Is there something wrong? And then the water started to slosh and everything started to move, and I was like, oh. Once I got over the panic, that was my first earthquake. Terrifying. Don't like it. 0 out of 10. Would not recommend. But the animals knew it before I did. So they kind of give me a signal, even though I didn't realize what it was. And then I understood after it was over. But I can't prepare for that kind of thing, and I can't do anything in that span of time. They last a matter of seconds, maybe minutes, and that's it. And then you just hope that everything kind of got through it okay, because there's really not a whole lot you can do. But we still have to build enclosures for that, right? Especially on the west coast of the US, a little bit more earthquake prone area, we do have to make sure that the enclosures that we're using, the walls that we're using, the fences, all that kind of stuff are ready for a little bit of shaking, because it tends to happen. And we want to make sure that those enclosures maintain their integrity through that whole event and that animals are safe. So in an earthquake, we can't really do a whole lot, but we can prepare ahead of time so that if we're in an area that we know it's probably going to happen, we make sure we're using proper materials and we have a proper checklist, I guess, to go through after the fact to make sure that everything's good. When it comes to other types of natural disasters, we're generally ready to respond to that kind of thing. So the first thing, as I said, is bringing in animals. We teach them an emergency recall for the animals where it's appropriate, so that no matter what is happening, they are always going to respond to that recall. We do it for if people enter the enclosure and are in the same space as animals and we need to protect everyone. We do it for any kind of enrichment issue. So if they've gotten a hold of something that they're not supposed to have, or they're interacting with it in an inappropriate way, we can just get their attention. We use that emergency recall to make sure that we got their attention and that they are going to respond. So an emergency recall is used. If there's, like, say, a storm coming that's going to be potentially bad, hail and wind and rain and all that kind of stuff, yeah, we want to call those animals in so that they are safely inside and they don't have to get pelted with rain and wind and hail. After that, we make sure buildings are secure. We make sure that guests are secure, that staff is okay and secure, that everything is going according to plan, that there's nothing out of place. Animals have food and water just in case we can't get back into that building for a little while. And we make sure that everything is as secure and well-stocked as we can possibly make it before we walk out that door. Not every institution's response is going to be the same, but this is just kind of the general guideline of what happens. Now, when you're dealing with a really bad storm, perhaps, or a bad situation where you're not going to be able to get back to the facility for a while, you do the best that you can. So that might mean in a hurricane, we supply some penguins with a bunch of food and then just kind of hope for the best and, wish them luck. We'll load up, 2 days worth of food so that they have it just there if they want it and they can make it through, right? It's going to be a mess when we come back. We understand that. But we can do that with the animals. Like, we might have methods to be able to distribute food even without people there. I know at my facility we have auto feeders for small animals. The animals that need to eat consistently have auto feeders. Is that perfect? No, they have to be powered somehow. So it's not a perfect solution, but we just make sure that they have all the food for their auto feeder that they can, and we do our best. Otherwise, we'll just dump a bunch of food in there and hope that it sticks around for a little while. And we have to walk away, right? Human safety comes first. Even though we put all of our energy and effort into animal health and safety, right? But in the end, when it comes down to a big emergency, we have to take care of ourselves first. So I keep using hurricane as an example because it's just very familiar to me. facilities in hurricane-prone areas tend to have a little bit of a loose rule, right? If it's a Category 1 or 2, there's going to be staff on hand to ride that storm out. If it's a Category 3 or higher, most likely we're going to have to leave. And that means that we're going to have to do the best we can to secure the animals, make sure everything's good before we head out. And that's often because it's dangerous to stay there, and we're under evacuation orders anyway, right? So you've got facilities that are in a place where a hurricane's hitting. Guess where their staff live? They live all around that place, right? And so there are areas when you have, or times, I guess, when you have to pay attention to where the facility is, as well as where your staff are living, because staff may be told they have to evacuate before they make the final call, I guess, on a storm for the institution's location. So I've been there before where my institution was quote unquote fine, but the area where I lived, I had to evacuate. I was told by police I had to evacuate. So there's not much you can do with that. Like, you can maybe offer the people a place at the institution to ride out the storm. And I guess that's a double win, because then you have staff on site to monitor things and respond to emergencies. But at the same time, that's a dangerous situation for your staff. So you don't necessarily want to be the one to make that call to have your staff stay, right? Because if something happens, I don't know about you, but I would never forgive myself. So we have to make these decisions when these kinds of situations are coming up, and kind of do the best we can and hope that we're making the right decision. So most of the time you're going to see the facilities in that sort of situation where there's a really, really bad situation coming, where they have to leave their facility. I guess war is technically another type. I know that when the Ukraine-Russia war started, there was a lot of concern about animals in Ukrainian zoos because there was a war raging around them. The zookeepers stayed. They're sitting there and taking care of those animals as long as that building is standing, right? As long as that facility was there, they were trying to take care of those animals, because it's not the animals' fault. The animals are scared too. And so those zookeepers, bless them, they stayed for a very long time trying to take care of those animals. And I know a lot of animals got moved out thereafter, which is great. So they moved to different countries, which is not ideal, but given the situation, nobody had control over what was happening. And so it was best to get the staff and the animals out to safety. So even though we have established protocols for how to deal with these sorts of situations, we're still kind of making it up on the fly, because every storm is different. Every situation is going to be different. Yes, even though you're in a facility that has established protocol, you might have to flex some of those rules a little bit, right? Because this storm is quite a bit larger, or is hitting at high tide. That's one that has affected my facility where I was working at once upon a time. And yes, it was a similar hurricane to one that hit in the past, and it wasn't that bad, but there was one that hit us at high tide, and we were situated right over the water. That was going to be a bad, bad deal. So we responded differently, even though we had an established hurricane protocol, because that storm was going to be pushing water into our building, which it did. So you have to be able to consult the handbook, if you will, but then also understand where you need to make some changes and make the best decisions that you can with the information that you have, and hope for the best. So what about when it's non-natural disasters? Like I said, war is technically a non-natural disaster that's very much human-made, and there have been facilities that have worked through that. They generally do everything they can to save those animals and save the staff. So that's priority. So however that needs to be done, that is what is done. Fortunately, other facilities are very sympathetic when that kind of thing happens. And so they're generally willing to take on more animals or take on more staff just to keep these entities safe. So keep the animals safe, keep the people safe. So that's nice. Charitable gestures, I suppose. But then let's say it is something else that happens that requires a facility to lock down or evacuate or something like that. I was at a zoo once upon a time working when a bomb threat was called in. Unfortunately, in the U.S., bomb threats and active shooters are a problem. They happen from time to time. And so we have protocols established for that kind of thing. So in this case, I was working at this zoo and a bomb threat was called, and the staff at that facility had that whole place cleared and evacuated in 15 minutes. It was amazing. And it was very orderly. Nobody panicked. Everything was very calm. I, being a zoo aquarium professional, could understand what was happening and was listening to the radios to get updates on what was going on because there were staff with us. And I was hearing the chatter over the radio, so I understood what was going on. So that, I don't know, calmed me down. Maybe it didn't calm down many of the normal guests, but I was calm. And so we just wandered out of the facility and to a safe spot a few blocks away on foot, which was weird, but it was fine. And everybody was safe. Animals were recalled. There was everything went as smoothly as possible. And though that facility did not plan that drill, they passed with flying colors. It was great. They did such a good job. Now, there are things that we prepare for that are part of drills. Evacuations would be one for fire or active shooters, something like that. We do have to practice for that. So we tend to run planned drills just to see and make sure that people understand what to do and kind of get the muscle memory of responding to that sort of situation so that if it were ever to occur in real life, then they would be able to just execute the plan without thinking about it deeply or trying to remember something that they read over, 5 years ago. Oh, we just practiced this past year, so it's kind of fresh in my mind. I can make it. I know where to find the information if I need it, or I remember what I did then, so I'll do that again. So we do practice that sort of thing. We also practice for dive emergencies. If you're an aquarium or have scuba diving, we always want to practice for that because you never know what's going to happen. People have medical issues, and scuba diving puts a lot of pressure on your body, like figuratively and literally. So we have to be ready just in case somebody has a medical emergency while they're diving, because if they're going to have a medical emergency, it's likely going to happen while they're diving. So we do practice for that, and we want to make sure that we have a relatively good response just because we want it to be as timely as possible, because minutes mean everything. And time is of the essence. You need to get that person out of the water, get them their, first aid of whatever type, give them oxygen maybe, and then just get them to a hospital immediately, as soon as you can. So we do practice for that. Another thing that we will practice for are fire drills, just to make sure that everybody knows how to get people out of that building, right? Or out of that area. So we do practice for that and make sure that everybody understands where they're supposed to be, what they're supposed to do, so that no one gets left behind and that everything is handled accordingly. Your pivotal equipment that could be dangerous is shut down. Your animals are secured and the people are out. So we do practice that to make sure it's as quick as we can get it and that it's seamless, so that in an emergency, if there was an actual fire, we know what to do. We know how to clear that area and we can get people out safely because it's no big deal. We practiced for that. This is probably not one that zoos prepare for, but aquariums do. And that is power outages. Because when you've got pumps running 24/7 and all of a sudden the power goes out and they stop, and then water flows in weird directions and becomes a victim of gravity, you've got water everywhere. So you could have a tank that normally runs fine when the power's on, then start back siphoning so that it floods the floor and that sort of stuff. So we do practice some power outage type things, not all the time because it is hard on the pumps to do that as well, but it happens, and we'll just randomly unplug things when we set up a new system just to make sure that we understand what it's going to do if the power ever goes out. So we know what things turn off, what things turn back on their own, and we have emergency procedures to check by order of priority certain systems. So a lot of times your jelly systems are going to be a priority because they can either back siphon or pump a bunch of air into the water column when they come back on, which is lethal for jellies. So we don't want that. So those tanks tend to be a priority as far as like troubleshooting when they come back online or when the power has gone out and we don't want all the water to come out as well, that sort of thing. So we have like priorities. These few things need to be checked first, like right away. And you'll see aquarists scatter when the power goes out because they're going and doing those things without even communicating to each other that that's what they're doing. We all know what to do. So we just scatter and we go check things that we're closest to generally and make sure that everything's okay, make sure that the animals are fine, and then we will try to figure out what happened and why we don't have power. Another potential problem for both zoos and aquariums is a water outage. So if for some reason your city, your municipality, your water source coming to your institution is shut off for an extended period of time, that's a problem. In the US, you're not supposed to have a business open like that if you don't have access to bathrooms. And so in some cases, we would have to close depending on how long that outage is because people need to use the restroom and need to wash their hands and all that kind of stuff. We don't want people making a mess or getting sick or anything like that. So we do have to understand that there are times when we may not have access to water and we have to have a game plan for that. And for an aquarium, that's also a little bit of an alarming thing because a lot of us use our local water sources for various different things, whether that's making the salt water that we're using or the fresh water that we're using for exhibits or, cleaning dishes or cleaning filters. There's a lot of different things that we're using water for. And so we need to be very aware when there's no water supply to our building. And also when it comes back on, there's generally a lot of junk in the water. So we need to let it run when it comes back on for just a little bit to flush out all the mess that shook loose when the pipes abruptly stopped and get all that junk out of there so we're not putting it into the aquariums and making fish sick. Other things that we need to prepare for, guests injuring themselves, and depending on the type of injury, there's a protocol for that. Who do you contact? How do we get the EMS there if we need it? What's the severity of the injury? How do we handle that? Do we move them? Do we not move them? Like that kind of thing. We have protocols for all of that because we want to make sure that no matter what happens, we're trying to be as safe as possible. We don't want more people falling over somebody who's sitting on the floor. We want everybody to remain calm. We want that person obviously to be taken care of and be in good health. We want their family to be able to be with them and calm and all that fun stuff. So we have protocols for how we respond to these things, even if it doesn't involve the entire facility, even if it only involves a few individuals who are just trying to manage the situation. But we have lists and handbooks and rules and we have all of that in an easily accessible location, usually in multiple locations throughout the facility, so that if that kind of stuff happens, you just go grab that binder or that sheet of paper and you just go with it, because we're not expecting everybody to do all of this flawlessly. We want them to have a good idea of what they're supposed to do and maybe some muscle memory to go along with that so that they just automatically do it without having to really think deeply about it. And then just handle it as best you can. I do not love when facilities blame staff for an inappropriate response. Now, if you have somebody getting injured and you don't attend to them, yeah, that's a problem. But if a staff member in good faith did what they thought was right, I feel like that's more of a, let's talk about this and see how we can improve it for next time. Maybe we need to adjust our protocols, versus you did this wrong, you made us look bad or whatever, and blaming that person for the situation when they did their best, Despite the fact that we have kind of handbooks for this kind of stuff, not every situation fits into the handbook, And so we have to be, as leaders, a little bit more flexible about that, because not every storm's the same. Not every emergency situation is the same. Sometimes people will come into the facility and try to liberate animals, which is dangerous for a lot of people that are involved, whether they happen to be actually involved with that case or not. They could just be standing nearby when somebody cuts the netting on an enclosure, right? It's still a dangerous situation. And so we have to be ready to respond to that in a neat and orderly fashion, get those animals secured, get the people out of there so that everybody is safe. And so not all these situations are going to be exactly the same, because it's different when you've got an animal that has escaped from your reptile house and is just wandering around on the floor, rather than someone breaking down a gate in your lion enclosure. Those are two very different things, where an animal can be very large and wander amok in your entire facility versus just being in the reptile house but out of their enclosure. So yes, we have dangerous animal escapes and protocols for that, but not every situation is exactly the same. So the response to that is not always exactly the same. But a lot of your AZA accredited facilities have big, long lists of scenarios and worst case situations that we have thought deeply about, that we have written protocol for, that we try to make sure are up to date and sensible, and we try to work that stuff out with police and fire and EMS, and try to make sure that our protocols are as up to date and sensible as they can be, because we don't want to let that go without being reviewed, because all of a sudden you blink, you have an emergency situation and you're dealing with protocols that were written 10 years ago. And, that phone number that is on there for who you have to call is no longer accurate. That person is no longer here, right? So we want to make sure that we review them at least annually to make sure that everything's right, and to add any scenarios that either have happened or could happen. Technology is always changing, so we have to roll with that, and situations may occur at other facilities that we then realize that we have to prepare for as well. You never know. People are unpredictable. So they do things sometimes and we're like, I never thought about that. That we should probably prepare for. It's just one of those things. So we have to then think about that and create a game plan for if that ever happened. Also, one thing that should be noted is that a part of all of these responses includes a list of people who need to be contacted. Obviously, in an emergency situation, emergency services is number one. So you get your fire, EMS, and police out there, right, to handle whatever's going on. Next up, you need to contact the leaders in that area where the issue is happening, or the zoo or aquarium leadership team, or the director, or all of these other people. And usually those higher up phone numbers are being called later in the situation, because obviously EMS or emergency services would be first. And then we go down the list of people based on what they can do. Even the marketing team is in there, because we got to make sure that we're putting our best foot forward as far as our public response to this emergency situation. So they might want to post somewhere on social media saying everything's fine, we're all good, this is what happened, that kind of thing. So we have members of our staff in all sorts of capacities who handle all sorts of different things that are part of the emergency response. So even though your director may not be there when a lion escapes, they will be called shortly thereafter. Of course, we're securing the animals, we're getting the people out of there, we contact emergency services if needed, and we go down the line of emergency calls after that, so that everybody who needs to know is aware of the situation and we have it all covered. But this is all a part of the written emergency response that we all have, this handbook of different scenarios that could happen, and if they do, we're ready. So it might be up to like 60 different things that could happen, either have happened in our past or have happened to other facilities, or could happen if you really played your cards right and like had somebody really dedicated to making that happen. And so it gets to be a long list. It's very difficult to read through and evaluate and update, but it is worth it because you don't have to think at that point. The scenario happens, you look it up in your handbook, and boom, off to the races you go. You know exactly what to do because you've thought about all this before it was an emergency and before you were panicking. So just follow the notes that you wrote for yourself. You're going to call these people. You're going to do this thing. You're going to make sure that the animals are secure and the people are okay. And then you go from there and handle it however you've already decided you wanted to handle it. And that's it. Emergency response. All set, ready to go, available to everyone so that we make sure that everyone is as safe and secure as possible and there are minimal injuries, usually none. But you never know what's going to happen. So you just have to be ready for everything. Okay, if you have any questions about that or any other leadership or management things or zoo or aquarium stuff, just let me know. Write it up in an email. You can send it to me at aquatazoo@gmail.com. If you're enjoying the show, and I hope that you do, don't forget you can follow or subscribe on your podcast player of choice. That way you'll get all of that sweet, sweet content as soon as it releases. If you'd like to support the podcast directly, you can find me at patreon.com/aquatazoo. And if you're looking to take a vacation and you don't know where to start, don't forget I am a personal vacation advisor with Magical Vacation Planner, and I would love to help you out. It does not cost you anything extra, so if you are looking to take a trip specifically to Disney, because that's where my specialty is, let me know. The links are in the show notes. Okay, thanks for listening. I heart your faces. Okay, bye.